Hello and welcome to First Interview Club, a show within a show where we talk to some of our favorite creators in the comic book industry. On this episode, we'll be talking to the author of such series as The Fade Out, Criminal, and Pulp. He's joining us today to talk about his new book, Where the Body Was, which will be available to purchase in January. I'm, of course, talking about the legend, Ed Brubaker, the king of comic noir comic books, and hopefully, by the end of this interview, a friend of the show. Ed, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So we got to read Where the Body Was before it is released, and again, a stellar entry into the Ed Brubaker catalog of books.
Oh, thanks.
It's a story about love and lies, and oddly enough, the TV show The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Before we get started, can you kind of tell us how this idea kind of came to you?
Yeah. Just one quick correction. The book is, because we image switched to new distribution, the book is actually, it's strange. It comes out in comic stores in mid-December and then in early January in bookstores.
Okay,
so
perfect.
So comic stores get like a 2 or 3 week jump on the bookstore market, I think, for this one.
All right, just in time for Christmas. Perfect.
Yeah, they're our biggest customer anyway, the comic stores. The book came, I was finishing up Night Fever, the last book that Sean and I did that came out a few months ago. And I think I had read the new Tom Perrotta book, the guy who did Election, and he did a sequel to Election called Tracy Flick Can't Lose. And I was reading that, and it just reminded me that I'd always intended to do a crime story told from a bunch of different points of view at the same time, kind of like the old 90s movie like Shortcuts, or like it was just like I always liked that format when I would see stories done that way in film or comics or novels, where it would like Game of Thrones, like the books are like every chapter is a different narrator. And I kind of experimented around with stuff like that in The Fade Out a little bit, but I really wanted to do one where it was like a bunch of different people all in the same location, where their stories are kind of overlapping. So you see bits and pieces of their stories in each other's stories, kind of. And I'd always really been obsessed with, as a kid, my dad used to collect these Dell Mapback books, these paperback crime novels from the 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. And they all have like maps of the crime scene on the back cover. And so I always wanted to kind of do something like that. And when Sean and I started doing the hardback books, we have end papers. And so I thought, wouldn't it be neat if the end papers was like a double page spread of like a map of a neighborhood, and that's where the story takes place. And so it started from there. And then it was like, I had 2 or 3 ideas that I had little bits and pieces of that I'd been noodling with for years that never really kind of came all the way together. And I just suddenly, it hit me that if I had them all take place around each other on this same street, that might end up being kind of like this weird tapestry of, people all in the same place at different places in their lives. Like one of them's a little girl, one of them's like, a junkie teenager, it's like there's people at all different ages in this story, at all different, it's like in some ways you can get the whole history of what it feels like to love as a human being in that book is my hope. It's like from the time of like your first childhood crush on the guy who lives down the street to being in an old age home wondering about that person who broke your heart when you were 50.
And it's funny because in the after words or the afterthoughts of the book, you kind of mentioned how it was fun for you to just kind of wrangle all those characters like in different notebooks. And I just kind of imagine you with a big bulletin board with thumbtacks and just like, okay, this person's here at this time. And was it kind of like that, or was it a little more manageable?
It was actually. I got I started by trying to design the map, and then I was having trouble doing it, so I got my wife, who's an artist, to like help design like what the street would look like. I kind of was describing it. We were looking at photos and maps and trying to sort of build one. And then she made one at like a hand-drawn one, and we sent it to Sean, and then he found someone, I think through Instagram or someone, like just some fan of his who's like a architecture like art person who took that and basically redesigned it into like a 3D model of a neighborhood. So Sean was able to use that while he was drawing. So that's why all the houses are in the exact right spot everywhere. Like it would like
That's
all his
wild.
pencils have all this architectural like blue lines and all over them. It's fucking crazy.
That's amazing. How cool.
But yeah, it's funny because like the whole story, I had an idea for a story about a guy um who has a police badge. And I had a thing happen when I was young. My mom's third husband was a therapist, a psychiatrist, and the guy who shared an office with him was arrested for trying to frame one of his patients
Wow.
he was trying to he was trying to like get one of his patients to murder his wife, basically.
So you're going to draw on from some real world experiences here.
I didn't get all the details of that story, and I certainly changed a lot of it, but there was definitely some aspects of, being around a couple of crimes that I wanted to try to figure out a way to put into a story. And I'd been sitting on them for, one of them. I mean, that happened like 30 years ago. Like,
yeah.
So it was just like one of those things where I was like, oh, someday I'm going to put that in a story. And I finally found a way to do it. Yeah. But it's funny because I really thought that the book would end up being like much more of like this gritty little thriller. And then as I was writing it, like Sean had always asked for a romance comic, and the closest I ever got was My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies, which is really a crime story about drug addiction. But this one I really feel like about 20 or 30 pages in, I was like, oh, I think this is the romance one, actually. I mean, of course, it's a crime story too, and it's a lot.
There is some sweetness to this story that you don't really anticipate with kind of how the events start to unfold, but there's a little bit of bittersweetness, like it's like dark chocolate, and you're like, this is kind of endearing as I'm reading this.
Yeah, I feel like our attempt was to make a book where like the object itself sort of makes it a thing that you kind of want to see all the different people's stories, and you can flip to the, like, if you have the hardback book, like you can flip right to the end paper to get the to look at the map as you're turning pages. It's like, oh, you'll always get to sort of remind yourself where they are, and and it's like, oh, it's funny too, because like for months I couldn't figure out a good name for the book. Sean was like halfway through drawing it, and I still didn't have a name for it. And I was looking at the map one day, and I just saw the last listing on the map says where the body was. And I was like, oh God, it's been there the whole time. That's a perfect name for a book. Where the body was. And it sort of is evocative of like because like I said, I feel like, you see some of these characters go from young to like, dead in the course of this book, like live their whole lives in 150 pages. And like
I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, I was kind of looking for something like that with the title, like that would imply like, something that was like, because where the body was, sort of, if you think about it, it doesn't just mean where like a dead body was laying on the street. It's like, where have we all been in our whole lives? Like you look up one day and you're like, oh yeah, 20 years just passed.
Yeah. There is this unique narrative style to it of just like, there's flashbacks and flash forwards, and it's almost kind of like we're watching a documentary about these events. When you started to write this book, was that intentional, or did it kind of just like organically just kind of come about from writing it?
No, I knew I wanted to do a lot of like breaking of the fourth wall, and it was funny because I was telling a friend about it, and they were like, oh, kind of like a true crime podcast. And I was like, oh, well, I wasn't thinking that at the time, but yeah, I was thinking more like I don't know, like Dan Clowes or Chris Ware sometimes just have people walking on the street talking to you in their comics, or like Harvey P. Carr, or like, it's just like even like Peanuts, Charlie Brown's like walking along, just like talking to you. And I just wanted to sort of really play with everything that I could do in comics. And it's like Sean and I have been doing books together for over 20 years now. And I feel like anytime we're not doing something to try to like play with the storytelling or push the envelope on what you can do with the language of comics, then I feel like maybe we're just coasting.
So you're like always challenging yourself. Like, I don't want to be predictable. We got to do something totally wacky.
Kind of like when I told Sean, I was like, I think this one's basically going to be like a bunch of short stories that all take place on the same street that kind of overlap each other, and there'll be a map. He's like,
Yeah.
a map. Like, but I feel like if we don't try to just keep swerving left or right, then we're just going to coast or something. Like, I always want to try and really do the thing that feels like the most vital right at that moment. And at the moment that I sat down to start writing, like I filled up a whole notebook with about all these different characters. And,
Holy shit.
like some of them are based on real people, but all of
Mhm.
them have like a bit of a piece of me and, my life in them too. And, I had like a year where a lot of stuff had happened in my life that made me sort of look around at what, at like the world we were living in, and how much time had sort of passed while we were all sitting around in the pandemic,
Right.
and just kind of realizing that like as you get older, like the things that you care about in life totally change, and the way that you look back at your heartbreak at 18 feels completely different at 55.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
At 55, you're kind of like, you can go through your 30s and 40s still being upset about it, and then suddenly you get into your 50s and you're like, what a schmuck. Like, you were lucky to have what you had, dude.
Exactly.
Like,
enjoy the heartbreak. It made you better.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like how like I obsessively collect books for my whole life, and now I'm like trying to get rid of books because I'm just like, I don't need all these books around constantly. And it's like every time I get rid of any, I bring in twice as many.
Yeah, you bring in more. You're just making room for the new crop.
Yeah, that's kind of what it's like. I need to clear off a shelf. But it's like as you get older and as a writer, you're always kind of writing about your life and what life is like, and I noticed that as I was getting older, and especially into my 50s, like there were certain things that used to bother me a lot that don't bother me as much, and other things that bother me way more. But I noticed like, I'm a writer, so I'm obviously like a big navel gazer who looks back at the past all the time because I'm like thinking about it and writing stories.
Mm-hmm.
But I really did feel like at some point in life, you go through like a change where you sort of feel differently about a lot of different stuff. And I'd never really written anything about that. And I thought, if I do this thing that has, like a dozen main characters, they can all be at like different points in life. And you can sort of show how someone went from being like a 17-year-old kid to, a 57-year-old man who has a completely different take on love.
Yeah. And it's great because you get that from the characters, you get that first person point of view from them directly of just like them reflecting on their past self from the story. And so it's like, it's a unique and different style of storytelling that
it's definitely a little bit of a mind bender. At some point I had to just stop trying to make it like have a rule, because I was like, well, he's riding his scooter down the street talking to us. And he's still 18, and then you turn the page and he's 57 and he's talking about something else, and you're like,
I was expecting to see like a camera crew mid comic. I was like, where's he going with this? This is wild.
No, it's one of those things that it's like uniquely a comic book thing, I think, is like
that is 100%. Yeah.
Because it goes back and forth between like a third person narration and everybody then telling their sort of first person stories, and some of them interrupting each other to say, hey, that's not how it happened. Come on.
Yeah.
Like,
I just,
so like that was just so much fun to try and do, but also like a real brain breaker for putting the book together, like figuring out whose stories went in what order. And there was one point where I was like, I'm just going to write all the different chapters and just throw them in the air, and then that's the order that they go
in. What order they land in when they fall, that's how I'm telling it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, no, they need to be in this very specific order. But
I do want to say you do mention the Descendants in there, which is maybe one of my top 5 punk bands of all time.
Oh yeah.
And whenever that scene comes up, I'm just like, oh man, Ed's one of us. He enjoys the SoCal punk scene.
Oh yeah. No, that was I remember in fact, that summer of '84, they had just gotten back together because Milo was back from college, I think. So they were like touring again that summer. Like I remember all my friends going up to Orange County to see that show, and I didn't go.
Oh, bummer. Oh man.
Dang,
I bet that was a wild show too.
Gnarly. Orange County punk shows was where you go to get murdered.
Yeah, I've seen footage of of descendant shows on YouTube, and like those shows just get out of
Oh yeah.
control.
Yeah,
Gnarly.
the Cuckoo's Lounge stuff, like in the
Hmm.
like where they invented slam dancing supposedly, and it's like
Yeah,
they also
as the legend
invented like
goes.
they also invented like fighting with like dirt heads in the parking lot outside. Well, actually, I'm pretty sure that's been the human condition
Yeah,
forever.
fighting after any punk show is just kind of like
Yeah,
the sign
that
of a good
that club
show, I
was
think.
really interesting down in Orange County. It was like right next to like a country bar. So it was like there'd be like
Oh, perfect.
the parking lot was like what divided them. So yeah, it was like
It's like the Hatfield McCoys, just like whenever a show got out.
yeah, yeah, totally.
That's awesome. So with a lot of these books have been inspired by like pulp crime, like dime novels of like the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Why do you think that those genres translate into comic books so well? Is it like the self-contained story, or is it just like the really entrenched characters? I mean, like every crime novel that or crime story that's been put in the comic books has just been so perfect for the medium.
Well, yeah, I think in the 50s there was this brief period of time in like the late 40s, early 50s where crime comics were huge, like romance comics and crime comics
Hmm.
and horror comics were really big, and superhero comics had kind of died. And like when I was a little kid, my dad had gotten like a ton of comics. And so like I was reading like old EC crime suspense stories and stuff at
Yeah.
the same time I was discovering like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four. So in my mind, I always thought that they were kind of, the same, like, or like Archie, like anything that really has that kind of strong graphic element to it. And like crime stories, you know, they're just I don't know. There's something really human about it. Like we can all kind of relate to the characters that are in it and we're watching them, cross lines that we're afraid to cross in real life. That you always wonder, like,
Hmm.
I could just walk behind there and grab that thing and walk out of here. And in the story you can do it. But
Yeah.
but also I think crime stories have, you know, similar graphic elements to like sci-fi and superhero stuff. There's a lot of like sort of the pathos of the characters and what they're going through. It's just like you have a car chase or a gunfight instead of, people blasting, ivy
Lasers.
at each other or
Yeah.
whatever. I think it's the real human connection of it, because like one of my favorite comics ever, like his crime suspense stories, the ones that Johnny Craig wrote and drew himself. He was like a sort of a guy who grew up studying Eisner.
Okay.
And he was one of the few guys from EC that didn't survive after the Comics Code because he really couldn't do, superhero stuff at all or kids
Yeah.
stuff. He went into advertising art, but he's a big influence on guys like Neil Adams or Jim Aparo, who drew Batman in the 70s,
Oh, right on.
80s. But yeah, he's really just like, he did these like 6 to 8 page long little noir gems, like a story about a guy and a guy who's unhappily married running into his high school girlfriend who's unhappily married, and they make a plan to kill off each other's spouses and run off together and cover up the crime by each pretending to be the other person's spouse that they're just on vacation with, and then they slowly become these people that they were trying to get away from, that they
Uh-huh.
each hated. And it's just like, but he does it in like 8 pages and
Yeah.
makes you just like you're watching the horror of this woman sort of gain weight for these photos and cut her hair different, and
Uh-huh.
it gives you like a real Hitchcock kind of vibe, and it's just like an 8 page story.
Yeah.
But I grew up reading that stuff and like watching old noir films. So to me, when I start writing these stories, like Where the Body Was, there's definitely like a lot of crime elements in it and everything, but the plot is, I mean, all over the place. Like it really just, if you
Yeah.
took the crime out of it, it would just be a story about a bunch of people fucking up and fucking.
And that's kind of why I love it so much. It's just like a group of average people just really continuing to just fuck up more and more, and then like it just gets so entangled with one another. It's like, well, how are they gonna untangle this mess? And then we get the ending, which I won't spoil, but it's just like, yeah. But it's just like, it is a wild, like average everyday people just like thrusting themselves into chaos,
Well,
honestly.
I think that's what noir or crime, is at its best, is like that. I mean, one of my favorite movies is Double Indemnity, which is just like an insurance salesman who just meets a woman one day, and it's just like it's just been too long since he's felt any kind of passion in his life, and here's
Right.
this crazy moment, and it's like I feel like everybody has those moments in life, like peaks and valleys of the world, and you're just kind of like, where everyone's desperate for like love and affection, even if they've got it in their life, it's not the right kind, and they want it from someone else, or they want it from everybody, or
Yeah.
like
That's
I knew a friend in high school who, like, anytime anyone dated a girl, he had to go out with her. Like, if you liked a girl, he had to go out with her first. It was like a compulsion or
A
something.
point of pride.
Yeah, exactly. And people are just, and he was a nice guy, but it was like he just had like a real compulsive, like, weird thing. And so I just think people are really complex, and so you throw a crime story in there too, like someone's having an affair, and it's like, oh yeah, but we got to get rid of the husband, or we got to get rid of this, or we got to get rid of the wife, or it's like
let's just
you
complicate
start
this
throwing
more.
crime into it, and it's like the human desperation like has like an extra compelling edge to it. I feel like that's why I just keep coming back over and over again. Our next book is actually like about satanic panic, so
Hell yeah.
going even darker.
Let's go.
All darker and more suburban, right?
Yeah. I'm into it. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
I was really drawn to this book because as a reader, I not only connected to like the different stages that these characters were at, but looking forward to the older characters, you can relate to them. And then all the stuff from the future made you like nostalgic for your own past. But it was wild to me how I felt nostalgic and care for like a place that I've never been, or that even it doesn't even exist, right?
Yeah. No,
I thought it was great.
The real street that I was trying to base it on was actually torn down. They like bulldozed most of the houses on the streets, and I was doing Google Earth to try to find, because I wanted to get like as close to some of it as I could, and like because Sean lives in England, he doesn't know what Southern California feels like. And like Google Earth literally had like construction on the place, the actual place where the real house was. They were like in the midst of building like a huge condo complex on that whole corner, because it's like on a hillside overlooking the freeway in San Diego. But yeah, it was that was the goal. I'm so glad to hear you say that, because it's like with everything I do, I'm trying to find a way to sort of mix that sense of nostalgia that we all have for our own youth. And I feel like comics is a really good tool for that, because every time you read a comic, there's some part of your subconscious that remembers every time you've ever opened a comic, like the first time you crack it. It's like every time I open a comic, I think about like Gwen Stacy's boot on the cover of an issue of Spider-Man. It's really her clone. Spoilers.
Well, spoiler for the comic book.
45 year later. Spoilers. Someone's mad about it.
Yeah, someone just unsubscribed.
Yeah, someone's like, I didn't know she was.
I wasn't there yet.
But it's like, that's what I think is so great about like tactile art. Like that's why I love like print and books and objects themselves, and like movies. I'm so glad, like years ago, right before the pandemic hit, I was about to go through and get rid of like all my Blu-rays and DVDs, because I was like, oh, this stuff's all on streaming forever now. And I'm like, oh God, thank God the pandemic came, and I was able to do that.
The only time that the pandemic is praised.
Yeah. All those Criterion Blu-rays cost twice as much now.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's like, oh yeah, that's not actually safe. So I love like the real tactile objects. I've been actually considering just not even doing like digital releases of our hardbacks until the paperbacks are out, because it's like all the digital release does is encourage people to pirate it.
Yeah.
I mean, on some level, you're not really getting the full experience until you're holding the book in your hand, I feel like. But
yeah, we always talk about that.
You get, not only do you get that experience, but you get like the experience of, it's like every time you walk into a movie theater, you remember being a little kid the first time you walked into a movie theater, even if you're not thinking about it. Like some part of you
Yep.
That's why you love going to the movie theater.
Hell yeah.
You know? And when you don't go for years and you go back, you have that sensation of, oh my God, why haven't I been here? It's like same thing when you walk into like a cool used bookstore. You know,
Oh, just the smell of old paper. Oh man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
Just
yeah,
hits
you
you.
smell that. And you're just like, oh yeah, I remember being like 12 and burying myself in this place trying to find every like Robert E. Howard I could.
Oh yeah. I used to ride my bike to one when I was a kid all the time, and like whenever I go to a bookstore, I'm just like, dang, wish I had my bike. I'd be going all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't tell you that this is a very special interview for me, because the first comic book I ever bought was Captain America 25, this second print. So,
really?
Yeah, it really was.
How old were you then?
Andy was a late bloomer.
Yeah, I was a senior in high school.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Wow.
Yeah, this is
was
really
your first comic
this is something
that you ever bought?
Yeah, the first one.
Yeah.
That
Holy
issue.
Shit.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He's made up for it with now. He's in debt to comic
You
books.
continued reading comics from that point?
Yeah.
Or did you got totally into comics after that? Just that? Did you follow that comic from that point on?
I did.
Wow.
I read every issue of Captain America that you did after that, and then I went back and got the previous,
cool.
24 issues.
That's amazing, man.
It's been downhill since then.
Yeah. Don't say.
So you were the catalyst. Ed.
Yeah. This is all your fault, man. This is
Yeah.
all your
Where do we
fault.
send the bill?
Yeah, really. Where do I send the bill? Yeah, that's amazing. That's so crazy because my first comic book was Captain America, like I think it's issue like 155 or something like that, where the two Captain Americas are running at each other. Like,
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
from the 50s. It's like a Sal Buscema cover where their fists are like bigger than their heads. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that like on the shelf at the PX and Gitmo when I was like 4, and like it was 20 cents, which comics were not 20 cents then. It was like comics were still only 25 cents, but the PX and Gitmo never returned anything, so you could find like comics that were years old on the shelf.
Oh, sick.
Brand new comics. Well, nothing was brand new either. You got stuff like 6 months after it came out.
Sure.
Like, but you didn't care because you're a 4-year-old kid.
Yeah.
You don't know Bruce Lee's dead. You think Bruce Lee's alive when you go to the movie. And they're showing you Enter the Dragon. They don't tell you, by the way, he's dead.
Yeah. Not up here.
Right.
He's always alive up here.
Exactly.
I did notice when we got the copy of the book to read that you guys have an AI statement at the beginning of just like we found it interesting that it was just like the images from this book, if released digitally, can't be used for AI prompts. Andy and I were curious if that's from you.
Yeah, it was from me and Sean. We don't want our work used to train machines to make comics or books or write things. Or I think it's horrifying that this is even happening in the world. And I know
100%.
I know that the big studios and big companies are totally gonna just look at it exactly like they looked at computer lettering or any other technological innovation that makes it easier for artists to do their job. Like, and I do know some people who are experimenting with it and stuff and struggling with is there an ethical way to use it? And my answer is no, probably not.
No, never.
I don't think so. It's not the same thing as like a robot arm that grabs a thing and moves it over here. It's literally just like micro plagiarism on this huge wide scale. And if the machine was actually just making stuff up, but if you type in like Ed Brubaker comic book cover into Midjourney, it comes up with something that looks like Sean Phillips painted.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like, I thought it would come up with a picture of me. I'm like, it doesn't have pictures of me. It doesn't care about me, but it knows Sean's art.
Yeah. It's straight up theft.
It's weirdly addictive for people. I've had some friends really fall into a hole where they like start doing that when they're like waiting in line at a thing instead of like texting or looking at Twitter or whatever. They're like just making weird pictures on Midjourney and texting them to you. And I'm like, stop doing this to me.
Yeah, because what you're doing is helping it to like learn stuff. He's like, no, don't use it.
Yeah,
make it stupid.
I feel like it it's like a weird thing. A lot of things about the internet are like this. Like the first time you looked at Twitter, like every single person, the first time they looked at Twitter was like, well, this looks like a stupid thing that would be a huge waste of time. And then 12 years later, they're like, oh
It
yeah,
still
that
is.
thing sucks. Like, oh, I shouldn't have. But it's like they're all engineered to get us addicted to using them, which then gives your brain the permission structure to think, well, these things are here and they're not going to go away and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't want to make any awful comparisons, but it's like the plans that these companies have for using this stuff is just that they don't want to have to pay the people to do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's nefarious. It's
because they don't want to pay people to do it. And they just kind of were like, well, it's not quite there yet. Anyway, we'll settle the strike. And in a couple of years, we'll just replace everyone with robots. I mean, that's my assumption with Hollywood is that they plan
it's a dystopian view, but like it's pretty accurate.
I mean, they're giant corporations. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders to pay as few people as humanly possible. And I mean, if they can get to a point where they can make something that looks like a Marvel movie with the amount of people it takes to make a Marvel comic, and sure, all those actors didn't actually do anything and nobody actually, made those sets or, like they'll do it. They're gonna do it. But England's economy makes so much money off those Marvel and Disney movies. Like there's so many economies around the world that make billions of dollars off of movies and TV shows being made there. And I feel like Georgia, they don't quite understand. Like I'm less worried about it on a creative level. Maybe it's because I'm old and I've been doing this long enough and people buy me and Sean's books because they're me and Sean's books, not because, there's some great book or, or it's like some high concept idea that a robot.
Well, they're synonymous at this point, actually.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like, there's a lot of stuff that comes out on these streaming platforms that, and I have a lot of friends that are screenwriters who get paid to just do rewrites of bad movies. And they're like, I might as well be rewriting a robot, like some of the time. So and also like the studios sort of try to make you dumb stuff down so that it's appealing to the highest number of humans possible, as opposed to making something that's an individual good. So I feel like those of us who like things that are handcrafted and have like humanity in them will still want them. But, there's a lot of people in middle management jobs and stuff that are just going to be replaced. Like people who work at like the law firm that my lawyer's at. Like there's a lot of like lower rung jobs or even like technical jobs in art fields, like in-betweeners at animation studios. So our animators only going to learn to do keyframes now, and then all the in-betweening will be done by robots. Like that makes sense on a production level, but then you aren't learning your actual job.
Right.
you're learning how to tell a robot to do
exactly.
So it's really weird. Like I have friends who are like, look at this thing I made. And I'm like, you didn't make anything. You just told it, you said 11 words to a computer program and it did it. And someone told you it's AI. So that's okay somehow.
Yeah. You're literally fueling the machine that's going to take your job. Congratulations.
That's like like when my text prompt wants me to not say shit and it keeps trying to say something else, I'm like, that's what the machine is. The machine is like the thing that's always auto-correcting incorrectly. It's the same basic idea. It's like trying to anticipate what you want.
I've never in my life said duck you.
Creepy about those. They seem to learn you. Like I have a friend who uses Midjourney only for one reason. He uses it to try to recreate the images from his horrifying nightmares he has every night.
Whoa.
And he is the best I've ever seen at doing Midjourney. None of his stuff looks like any artist you would ever imagine. They are the most horrifying images. He's a film director. He's like a horror film director. They're the most horrifying things I've ever seen in my life. They don't look like, but I was like, if I typed the same 8 words into Midjourney that he did to get that, it would come up with something that looked like Mickey Mouse, like shooting himself in the head or something. Like it wouldn't look
still
like
rad, but
a nightmare. But it's like the program has learned from him which ones he likes and doesn't like. So now it's trying to like, and I'm like, God, I really hope that thing doesn't have any actual artificial intelligence, because you might be giving it the worst nightmares of all
Yeah.
kind.
The first
Like,
time a robot commits suicide
training,
because of all
he's,
that.
he's training the Skynet. This is why they hate us. It's like
Yeah.
being what the whole plot of Westworld was like, being around all those people for 50 years made them just want to murder them all.
Yeah.
Which is like maybe the realest thing ever. Just
Yeah,
like, robots have had enough. They're like, you know what? We'll just fucking kill them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Do you guys want to talk about any of like the Marvel stuff or Hollywood stuff at all, or what's your?
I mean, I could sit here and tell you how great Captain America was all night, or
Yeah.
Iron Fist,
Yeah.
or
Do
we
you
could
have
go
3
on.
hours?
Yeah.
You mean the
I mean,
Iron
yeah,
Fist
whatever
comic?
you want to talk about, we're here for it.
Oh, sure. Well, whatever questions you guys have, I've got like another 10 minutes.
You're the
or
Captain
so.
America guy. Why don't you take it off?
Sure. My burning question about Winter Soldier has always been, was it your idea to bring Bucky back, or was that somebody at Marvel that was like, hey, we're kind of kicking around this idea, or like, where did that come from?
It was actually like a combination of things. It started when I was like 8 years old, when I went to the San Diego Comic-Con for the first time, when it was at the El Cortez Hotel, like the last year that it was there. My dad took me, and I was trying to find what I thought was issue 99 of Captain America, because I had issue 100 and up.
Yep.
Which I was a little kid, and it was pre-internet. I didn't know that there was no previous. I thought in issue 99 like came out in 1945 and Bucky got blown up.
Oh,
And
no.
so some comic book dealer guy, like, and this is like the mid 70s or something. So some like hippie dude was like, no, dude, that was a retcon. Stan Lee didn't want Captain America to have a sidekick, so they killed off Bucky in that when they brought him back in the Avengers. That's why he like wakes up and he's like, oh no, Bucky, no.
Right.
And
You're like, what the hell's a retcon?
yeah, and I had read all these like tales of suspense stories with Captain America and Bucky during World War II, so I just assumed those were reprints of like old comics from the 40s. I didn't know, because I just knew, because my dad told me that they actually published those comics during World War II.
Yeah.
I just sort of assumed like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna get the issue where Bucky dies.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had the issue of Spider-Man. Well, not that. I had a reprint of the issue of Spider-Man where Uncle Ben dies, and I had the issue of Spider-Man where Gwen Stacy died. I assumed if things happened in the comics, there were actual comics that they happened in. And so at age 8, I discovered what a retcon was.
Yeah.
And I started plotting like, someday I'm gonna write I was gonna write and draw Captain America, and I was gonna bring Bucky back, because Bucky was my favorite character, because I was a military brat, he was a military brat. Like, that was just the plan. So I started like mapping out different ways that Bucky could be alive. And every couple of years when I was a kid, I would sit down and like noodle on a story. So it was like a thing I had always wanted to do. And I was just finishing a contract at DC around the time that Bill Jemas left Marvel and Dan Buckley took over. And I got a call from Brian Bendis asking if there were any Marvel characters I was interested in, and because they were going to shake some stuff up. And I said, well, I would want to do Captain America, but they just hired someone. He's like, no, they just fired that guy, and Kirkman's going to do like a 4-issue fill-in, like until the new regular person takes over. And I was like, oh. And I was like, well, I don't know if they'll do what I want to do, because I have like this idea I've always wanted to do. I want to bring Bucky back. And he's like, no, we just had a huge summit, and they had this huge fight because Axel or somebody wanted to bring, it was like, I can't remember who wanted to bring Bucky back. I think Joe and Axel were interested in doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Brevoort was dead set against it, like gonna quit if they did it, etc. Like,
wow,
really, like it was a huge blowout. And so basically they were like, no, they're interested in it, but they need the right pitch. So it was like kind of fortuitous thing. And I had to like get on the phone with Joe Quesada the next day and sort of tell him the gist of, what I was thinking. And he said, well, look, if you can convince Tom Brevoort, then you've got the job, basically. And
how hard was that?
Tom had a bunch of questions about like, well, how could he still be young enough to, he doesn't have super soldier serum. Like, how is he like so Tom gave me like this list of questions that I had to answer satisfactorily to him. And well, hilariously, they actually helped me flesh out like the parts of the pitch that I hadn't figured out. It was like, oh, okay, well then, they put him in suspended animation between jobs because after, he saw Prince Namor in the Bowery one day, like before Johnny Storm found him, and he started having memories. And so they had to put him in stasis. So he's still like, he's 10 years older, than he was when he got blown up. But then they started putting him in stasis all the time. And Tom was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So,
that's incredible.
But it was really down to timing. I think a lot of people wanted to bring Bucky back over the years, and I just happened to get there at the time when Marvel was crazy enough to do it. It's like there's people out there who are like, we got to bring Uncle Ben back. Like somebody always wants to. Like I was definitely like that. That was one of my books as a kid. Like Spider-Man, Cap, Batman. Sergeant Fury, bizarrely. Iron Fist. I was like, I think I was the only person I knew who liked Iron Fist as a kid until Power Man and Iron Fist came along. Then everybody liked Iron Fist.
Everybody, yeah.
But yeah, it was just real luck on my part that I got there at a time when they would kind of let me do that story, and then also luck that like I had seen a couple covers that Steve Epting had done for Marvel of Cap and some other Avengers. And I knew his work from like the cross-gen stuff and the stuff he'd done before. And I just thought if I could get a guy like that to do like a kind of superhero espionage book that would feel really grounded and gritty, but you believe the guy in the Captain America costume feels like a real human being, like, if I could get him, then I felt like we had a real chance at doing like a real kind of serious, somewhere in between like a John le Carré and like a James Bond thing, but with superheroes and super villains. And that was, I feel like we achieved that. And I just was lucky that Epting hadn't signed on to another book yet. He had just got to Marvel right around the same time and was doing just a couple little jobs, fill-ins and covers, and just sort of getting his feet under him while he was like trying to get money out of CrossGen or something. Like all those guys were like suing CrossGen or something. I just remember that like they all arrived at Marvel and DC like
pissed,
broke and like ready to work, and like, but working at CrossGen had made them all like the best artists in comics,
right?
Because they were all just sitting around each other, watching each other draw and trying to one up each other. And so to me, Epting is just like, always been one of the most amazing guys who's ever worked in that field. He could have been like drawing like espionage, like comic strips in the 50s or 60s or something with, the best of them, like Alex Ross or Alex Raymond. But yeah, it was just, it was a pretty good, it was a dream job, really. Like we got lucky. The book took off like sales wise, and I had to do a few little things here and there for the crossover events, like a couple issues once for Civil War and one issue for one of the other ones that they were doing, which was cool because I got to work with Lee Weeks. But for the most part, they just let us do our own book. And, Epting is just not fast enough to do a monthly on his own. So there were some fill-in artists here and there. But, I think for a Marvel run, like I was on the book for about 8 years, and Epting drew the vast majority of it and then came back to draw my final issue. And he and I are talking about doing a project together, actually.
Cool.
Like a graphic novel.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I really want to work with them again. And there's a couple genres I still have done nothing in, and Steve would be perfect for some of that stuff, but I don't want to spoil anything.
Oh, okay. Can you spoil the genre you're thinking about?
No, I don't even want to do that.
Oh, man. So secret.
I give too much away.
Oh, okay. All right.
That'll be fine.
So now we just have to sit and wait for this special project to show up, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, just like Steve.
Oh man, I had it and lost it. Damn it! I hate when that happens.
Well, I got another one.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you like working on TV movies more or comics more? I mean, I think the answer is maybe pretty obvious, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, it really depends. Comics is my favorite thing, like in pretty much the whole world. Like I've been reading comics since before I could read, like but the amount of control and fun and the like it's just me and Sean and then Jake colors it, like, and it's like me and Marcos and Munza making Friday. It's like it's very different than anything in Hollywood. Like right now I've been working on a movie and a TV show, both adapting books of ours like Criminal and Pulp. And, that's looking, I mean, we'll see if either of them actually get made. They're both looking a lot, more positive than any of the other stuff that, I've worked on our stuff, like as far as chances go. But, it's a really frustrating field because there's no possibility that you could write the best issue of Batman that ever existed and everyone would be like, man, this is the most amazing script. God, I just wish we could publish it. But that's what happens in Hollywood. They're like, this script is amazing. I wish someone would make it. It's like, well, you're someone. Make it.
You're that guy. Of cameras? I mean,
yeah, it's like, am I a candid camera here? You can make this. Like, so there's a lot of, like, I've spent the last 10 years sort of working on TV and film and trying to get some of our stuff made as I learn how to do it. And, it pays decently if you get to a level where you can, be a showrunner or, do a lot of pilots or movie rewrites, stuff like that. But creative satisfaction wise, nothing, beats comics. I suppose maybe writing a novel might have the same level of satisfaction. But I think at this point with novels too, like the publishing side of it, there's a lot more, like they want you to have sensitivity readers and stuff like that, which, maybe is fine for some people, but I'm really used to just, I write a thing and I give it to Sean and it's like, I certainly don't try to be unsensitive, but I feel weird about, I've talked to friends who wanted to do like graphic novels for like major book publishers and ended up doing them at like Image or Dark Horse instead, because they were like, their whole system just felt foreign to me. Like I would have to like pitch an editor my idea instead of just writing it,
Right.
So yeah, for me, that would feel like going backwards to where we, have this deal where we can just do whatever the fuck we want.
Right. You're like, no, trust me, this is fucking great. So just make it.
Yeah. But like Hollywood stuff, it's like, I'm at a point now where like I have this deal at Amazon and the executives I'm working with there are huge supporters of my stuff and have been, people that I've worked with before, who the kind of people who don't give you notes that ruin your thing, but give you notes that, like one of the executives that I work with, this guy, Matt King, he's actually given me notes on this Criminal project to make it more like what I want it to be and less, like trying to, he's like, no, I think you're, like make it more personal, make it more you, make it more like what, make it more like what's great about the comic. And so that's a really rare thing to have. So I'm like really optimistic about all the stuff I'm doing with them.
That's really heartening to hear because, obviously when a company like that invests a significant dollar amount, they expect there to be a wide audience.
Yeah.
And anytime somebody says make it more personal, you're inherently like limiting your audience.
I mean, I really think I think right now, especially because there's a sense that things that go to wide audiences are becoming more and more homogenous, like this feeling that all of us who are the fans of the stuff are engaging with it less because we're feeling like we're getting the same thing over and over again. And the last time that happened in film was like the 60s. And, and then the 70s era of film hit where everything was personal and weird, but also still commercial. Like you can have both, that's the thing is like, if you like Criminal and you want to make a TV show out of Criminal, then you don't turn it into the Fast and the Furious. You find what's, you're like, oh, well, I mean, Criminal sold millions of copies around the world. Like we're published in like 25 languages or something at this point.
Wow.
So, we're bigger in France, I think, than we are in America.
That's amazing. That is so cool.
but yeah, it's a commercial property, so it's like but if you take all the like stuff that makes it like personal and weird or more unique out of it, then then you don't end up with something that people that won't be commercial because it'll just be like everything else,
Right.
Yeah.
like all those shows on Netflix that literally the name is just what the person's job is,
Yeah.
Teenage Bounty Hunter, Money Hunt,
Vampire Chef. It's like okay.
And I don't dislike these shows, but their names are just like generic. It's like Repo Man, where they just have like beer and food.
Yeah.
Like just generic white label.
Yeah.
So it's like, but then you have something like Taxi Driver, which is like this really personal thing, but it makes $100 million.
Right.
And it's like that's the thing. Like look at Barbie. Even Barbie was like obviously like a much more like personal, idiosyncratic, weird fucking movie than anything I thought would ever have the word Barbie in front of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like
I think it's
I actually, by the time I saw it finally, I was like, I don't get what all the fuss was about. It was pretty good, but I don't see why anyone was too upset or anyone was too excited.
Well, in America, there's a small group of white men who get angry at a lot of things, and their voices are the loudest.
I mean, I'm glad that the movie got made for a lot of reasons, because I know all my friends who have like young girls that they took to see it were like, like their kids loved it. And, it was like, I like the idea that like a bunch of 5-year-old girls are learning the word patriarchy.
Hell yeah.
In case they didn't know it already.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just funny to me, like that they made something like you could not say that anybody else could have made that movie than like Greta Gerwig.
For sure.
Yeah.
She's like the weirdest filmmaker, like, and she made Little Women, which was a very like straight commercial, movie that she then added like a weird twist thing at the end to that too, which made it sort of more idiosyncratic. But like, she's a commercial filmmaker, and that was a really odd, like, that was like an indie comic that got permission to use the word Barbie,
Right.
Yeah.
like it's weird to me that stuff happens, but that's what I think you've got to find in like Hollywood and in TV and film. Like you got to find these people who will let your freak flag fly in these things sometimes,
right?
Because that's the stuff that we all end up really loving.
Yeah.
It's like the computers aren't going to make anything you love, and if it does, then I'm depressed for all of us. But it's like,
that says way more about us.
Yeah.
Like think of Stranger Things. Like what did they say when they were pitching Stranger Things? It was like one part Spielberg, one part Carpenter, and one part something else. I can't remember what the third one was. It was like 3 different filmmakers that they were referencing. It's like the teenagers are in a Carpenter movie, the little kids are in a Spielberg movie, and the parents are in like a horror story or something.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the third one was. But it's like that's still like has more humanity in it than, but if you told a computer like 3 different directors to come up with an idea, if you told the AI engine, like, we want something that feels like Spielberg, Carpenter, and, Kubrick, like, you're not going to get anything that really still, you'll get something where you recognize bits and pieces of those people.
Yeah.
In it,
There's no heart.
Like,
they would just cut
like
up the movies and paste it together.
Yeah. It's like, The Hobbit by Wes Anderson. Here's a trailer. And you're like, you watch 5 seconds of it and you're like, yeah, this is stupid.
Yeah. Like who wanted this?
I'm really glad that spent 2 days working on it.
Yeah. Why does Frodo have 8 arms?
Yeah. What's going on with his feet?
His eyes won't look at me. What is going on?
There was one a friend sent me, and I was looking at it, and I realized that the fingers were hot dogs. They weren't supposed to be, but they were.
They were
clearly like frying hot dogs.
Briefly, you mentioned Friday, your comic about the teen occultist hunter.
Yeah.
Do you have any updates for us on that series, or any plans with that?
Yeah, I'm working on the final chapter of the first big story right now. Marcus is about like 10 or 15 pages into drawing it. It's going to be like a supersized final chapter because I don't know how else to do chapters of Friday. Apparently, poor Marcos. It's like 48 pages a chapter or something. The whole thing done will be close to 400 pages.
Oh my god, that makes me so happy. Friday has been just a delight to read.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited about it, and that's another one that like Hollywood has shown a lot of interest in. Though someone was like, "Oh, you might have to change the name because of Wednesday," and I was like, "Oh, Netflix will cancel that show by the time anything happens."
Yeah, exactly.
They're gonna make more than one other season of that, and then they'll just take a tax write-off and bury it.
Exactly.
Yep. That's the Hollywood.
Be gone forever. No one will remember it existed.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's very exciting to hear. I remember when that series first came out, and it kind of just blew my mind of how you just flip the script on like the trope of like, a group of kids hunting down these items, and then like they go off to college. You expect this one narrative to happen, and you're just like, no, fuck that. We're doing something completely different, and it was so amazing.
Yeah, that was one that I'd been thinking about for a long time. Like, I think I started coming up with what would end up being Friday, like in the mid '90s, like in a notebook. When I was gonna, before I broke into comics as a writer, when I was just writing and drawing my own comics and just barely scraping by in my 20s, I lived next to a library in Seattle, and I went through this huge phase of just reading all these young adult books from my childhood again, like rereading them all when I was like 25. And I remember a friend of mine, like thinking that it was really weird that I came home with like 8 Great Brain books and a bunch of Judy Blumes. And I was like, what? Like, like
they're books.
This is normal.
Just let me relive a thing, okay?
Yeah, they're young readers. They're middle grade.
Yeah.
I started, like, I had this idea, like, oh, maybe I can make a living doing that. Like, I'll write young adult fiction, and then I'll work on my comics on the weekends or something. And that never came to pass. But that was, I think I got hired for like a job at Vertigo, like during that same time, and then started getting paid to write comics and kind of followed that path. But Marcos emailed me one day asking if I had any ideas for something for him to draw. And I was like, oh, no, I don't really. And I don't really have time to do anything. And then the second I sent the email, I was like, oh, wait. And then suddenly, like, I had this huge rush of ideas because I thought, oh, Marcos doing some kind of New England winter horror thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just trying to think of something that would be really neat for him to draw. And, he's one of my favorite cartoonists ever.
Yeah.
I'd worked with him on Cap. We did, like, he and I and Javier Polito did an annual where I had lost the artist who was going to draw it like right before the deadline, and so they jumped in and drew, like, they'd split the duties drawing the whole thing over the course of like 3 weeks or something crazy.
Damn.
And we got it out on time, and that was the only time I'd gotten to work with him, so I was really excited about the idea of doing like a longer project with him. And of course, when we started, I thought it would be like 5 or 6 chapters, and then the first chapter came in. I thought the first 3 chapters were what I envisioned as the first chapter, which I thought would be 30 pages. So I don't know what happened because it was 120 pages. So, like, initially, Lance was going to be found dead at the end of chapter 1.
Dang.
Yeah. So yeah, once we realized how big it was, I started to feel sorry for Marcos. But like, Marcos just said he didn't want to work on a project with a deadline. He didn't ever want to rush through any of the art. He felt like a lot of times when he'd look back at jobs, he'd always like notice a panel here or there where he wished he'd spent, another day drawing. And, he's a total perfectionist. I think of him as kind of like Dave Stevens or something. The guy who did the Rock and
Roll. Okay. Yeah.
But like more cartoony and, weirder influences. But I love
the atmosphere of Friday is so, like, Maine, Delaware, but like that air is, you just like feel the cold in the air. It's as you know, it's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
And, like, just he crushed it in every way possible.
It's hilarious to me that it's so obviously, I mean, and what I was thinking of was the Great Brain crossed with like Edward Gorey and Lovecraft. Mm-hmm. But like, I named the place King's Hill, and it's like I'm friends with Joe Hill, who's Stephen King's son. But I wasn't even thinking about it. It wasn't until I was sending Joe the first chapter that I realized, oh, I'd subconsciously named the town after you and your dad.
Yep.
Which is like, if you're going to do New England horror, like at least acknowledge the King family. But I was like, what the fuck? Like, it didn't even occur to me. And then I told Marcos, I was like, this is kind of funny because it basically is like our like Castle Rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was really thinking of like, I loved these Edward Gorey books in the 70s and like 80s, the ones that John Bel Airs did about all these weird little kids in New England who always had like there was one, The House with the Clock in Its Walls, that they made a movie of like 10 years ago with Jack Black. Who's not the right person for that role. But
he answered the phone.
But it was that I don't know. I love that book so much. I really wanted someone to make a series out of that, or like a series of books, or a series of TV show or movies or something. But it was funny. Like I found some interview with Edward Gorey, because I always assumed that he did all the illustrations and covers for all these John Bel Airs books. So I assumed that he liked the books, but it turned out he didn't even like the books. It was just a job. The books were really tasteless.
That's the sign of a true master. He was like, I just need the paycheck.
It's weird though, because it's like he didn't like the books as much as I did, but like Edward Gorey did all this stuff where kids are getting murdered left and right, all those like Gashly Crumb Tinies and stuff.
Yeah.
And like these are totally just right up his alley. They're always about like a little kid who discovers this monster's come to town, or this guy who lives down the street is a warlock and he's got this figurine that's going to destroy the moon, or and it's like
he's
like,
pedantic
stuff like that. It just seemed like the perfect Edward Gorey kind of thing. I was like, that's weird to me that he didn't dig it, but whatever, artists. What are you gonna do? But yeah, it's the guy who wrote the books like died young. He was only like in his 40s, and so they stopped coming out in like I think the early 80s, and I think some other writer has picked up the series after they made the movies. But yeah, it was just, that was what I was thinking about, and I literally was just looking at the names of places in New England when I came up with Kings Hill, because it just sounded like a kind of place that somebody in like,
sounded someplace like a lighthouse, probably.
Yeah, like colonial times, like someone's like, this is the Kings Hill,
like
this place overlooking the water is the Kings Hill, and that's how places get named. Like I was doing all this research for the project that I set aside, or really just threw away when I started the Reckless books. I was about to do a series. Sean and I were going to actually do. This is hilarious to me now, looking back 3 years later. I had, for some reason, this weird thought that we could do a series that was somewhere in between like a 70s espionage book, but also like a fantasy thing with like wizards and elves and shit like that. And I don't know what I was thinking. And I was like working on the notebook, and I was like a couple pages in, and I'd been doing all this research into all these places that used to be on maps, because I'm fascinated by places that don't exist that were on maps, like these sort of mythical places that people used to think existed, that now we think of as like parts of fairy tales and stuff, but you can find them on maps. And I thought, oh, what if there was a world where these were all real? And but that's like a J.K. Rowling idea or a Neil Gaiman idea. It's not an Ed Brubaker idea. And I was like getting into it a little bit, and I was like, this just doesn't feel right. And then Sean sent over all the art for the Parker story that we were doing as a tribute to Darwin Cook. And I read that, and I just immediately was like, nope. I threw the notebook out, and I just started filling up the Reckless notebook. And I was like, nope, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a pulp thing. And, we're going to do like a series of graphic novels about this one guy, like a pulp character, like Parker, but like a good guy who's like Parker, who solves crimes instead of commits them.
Man, what could have been?
Well, I'll steal that fantasy idea.
I don't think anyone's missing a Brubaker and Phillips fantasy book, really.
You say that now, but when people hear this, they're going to be clamoring.
Yeah.
They're like, man, wouldn't ElfQuest have been great if they were just stealing stuff all the time?
That's what ElfQuest needed, guns.
Yeah.
And a drug problem.
Yeah. Skywise, hit the gas.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you have any more questions?
I think that's it.
Well,
All right.
Ed, I think we've taken enough of your time. We really appreciate it. You
All right.
stopping
Well,
by.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, Where the Body Was in December, mid-December, is when the issue comes out in comic book shops, and then later in January you can get it digitally. Is that right?
It's coming out in bookstores and I guess digital in January, probably. Yeah. But it's coming out in hardback book in your comic stores the second Wednesday of December, or maybe Tuesday. I don't know when Lunar lets people sell stuff.
Lunar's
I think it's still Wednesday,
Tuesdays,
I'm not sure.
I think. Yeah.
Break street dates, retailers. I don't care.
You heard it here. Break the rules, Ed Brubaker.
It's $25. Perfect Christmas present for your parents who think you're weird for liking comics.
Yep. That's how we hook them. That's how we hook the parents with these books now.
Yeah.
I realized like the first Comic-Con I did when I was like a professional, Michael Lark and I had just had like a collection of Scene of the Crime come out, and people were coming up to get me to sign it for their dad. And I was like,
Whoa.
oh, I'm the guy who does dad books. or like, and when I was doing Catwoman, these guys would come up and they'd be like, hey, can you sign this for my girlfriend? She doesn't like that I read comics, but she likes Catwoman. And I was like, oh, so I'm the guy who does the stuff for the comic reader's girlfriend. And this was at a point where, that wasn't a huge audience. Now it's like more than half the audience.
Yeah.
Now you go to Comic-Con and it's like 60% women. But
you kicked the door open.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I kicked it. Yeah, I did it. That's it. No, I think it was anime and cosplay. But because
Cosplay
when I grew up as a kid going to Comic-Con, the only people in cosplay were paid models who definitely did not read comics.
Sure,
and
definitely did
not
not either.
interested in talking about comics. Because I watched a lot of like professional comic book people trying to talk to like women dressed up like Phoenix and stuff. So in the 70s,
they're like, that's enough.
That was a fun thing to eavesdrop on.
Okay.
Watch your hero get shot down.
Yeah, Phoenix turned me down again.
Yeah, exactly.
Ed, again, thank you for coming on.
Absolutely.
If you ever want to come back on the show, you're always welcome. Just ring our line and we'll answer. And do you have anything else you want to share? Any social medias or anything for
no, I
anyone
don't
to
have
follow?
any. I just have a newsletter. You can, if you go to my bio page at Image, there's like a link to sign up for my newsletter. But I try to stay off the internet and away from my phone as much as humanly possible now. I'm just trying to live a bit of an analog life because too much of my day is spent in front of a computer, and now half of that is like on Zooms about meetings about things, and it's like I need that brain free time to think about writing and get up in the morning and spend some time with a notebook like a real human.
Well, thank you for being in another meeting.
No, thanks. Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
First Issue Club is edited and produced by Mike DeStacy, Greg Lichtag, and Andy Vargas. Follow us on social media at First Issue Club, and check out our Patreon for videos, audio, and more at patreon.com/firstissueclub.